Hello, we're with Adam Weinberg. Adam, thank you very much for taking the time. We know you're on sabbatical in Italy. We really appreciate it. Adam is a museum curator and director. He's been the Alice Pratt Brown Director of the Whitney Museum since 2003. During Adam's tenure, the museum has significantly grown in every way imaginable: size, collections, programming, and we think it's particularly relevant that you can tell us your thoughts about whether or not you think Aware would benefit from having some sort of footprint, presence, some way in the United States.
Well, it seems, first of all, to the degree to which I am aware, it seems that there is some presence and connection to the U.S. through connections to both the Brooklyn Museum and the Sackler Center. And I noticed that you've done exhibitions with Hammer Museum and others. So there is a presence. So I guess the question is what you mean by that presence and what is the purpose for that presence?
I think that should I talk, Camille? Or do you want,
yes,
do
talk.
I think that the question is that Aware needs a really more stable financial base. They have very little support from the French state, and Camille each year has to go back in an environment which is really not terribly conducive to fundraising, as you know. So of course, the US represents the most important opportunity for philanthropy. And so the purpose is really that Aware is able to have a more multi-year, stable financial base to continue to do the fundamental work that they're doing. Is that correct? Please.
Yes, perfect. J'aurais pas dit mieux.
Okay. You know, Camille and I have known each other since 2004 or 3. I'm sorry? Camille and I know each other since 2003 or 4. So.
And by the way, Adam, you're right. We are present in the States in the academic world. We are well known by Gen Z, as people said here, who are the people producing content for us. We have a lot of American professors in universities working with students, doing research, symposium. We've had partnership with great museums in the States. So the right people know us. But the question is money.
So the question is money.
Unfortunately, the question is often money. So first of all, I just want to say, Camille, congratulations for all that you have accomplished. I really admire what you've done. To start an organization from scratch like this, and the amount of ground that you've covered in, it's not even a decade yet, but close to a decade. It's really extraordinary and really much needed. And I really admire what you've done. So I think that's very important as a baseline. What I would say, I was reflecting on this the other day a little bit, and what is very common is that people look at the U.S. as the banker for programs all over the world, particularly in the cultural world. As I like to say, I've never met a friends group that the international community doesn't like to have in America, because everybody wants a friends group in America. What I might propose to you, Camille, is to look at a slightly different model. That obviously there's always funds available in the US, but also as the funds have become available, they're also increasingly competitive, because as you know, there's probably 8 or 10 friends groups just from France alone, if not more, in the United States, not to mention if you go to Germany, Switzerland, etc. So as I thought about it, I was thinking about maybe a more international approach. I think that, the questions of feminism and the questions of women in arts and culture are much broader than the United States or France or Europe, for that matter, as you well know, because you, in fact, have, you have pilot projects in all parts of the world. What I would probably look to as a model, and that's not exclusive to the United States, including the United States, but I would look at creating a business committee of women business people who want to support culture and the arts. And I would look at it as an international business committee. It could have a real presence in the United States and Europe, but I think you could get a lot of support internationally for that. And I actually think you will attract more support from the United States rather than going to just people in the United States, as everybody always does. But if you were to create a very select group of women business leaders and really focus on women business leaders who themselves have had many challenges by being women to ascend through the glass ceilings of their businesses, I think you would hit something a little bit different than just saying, okay, we're going to go to the United States and set up a 501c3 in New York and go to all these business people. And what I would look at maybe is trying to create a business committee. I would try to find maybe leaders in various parts of the world. One may, maybe a couple in Europe, a couple in Asia, one or two in South America, maybe if you could find one or two in Africa, and really create a very tight community. And again, and you'll have to figure out the tax and the financial implications of this because it's more complicated than that. But I think it'll be more attractive to people in the United States to be part of an international effort rather than simply just feeling like another friends group that is being approached in the US. And I can imagine in Korea, I can imagine in Japan, I can imagine in Philippines that there are particularly women in business who would be very interested in doing this. I would try something a little bit more focused in that way rather than just setting up a 501c3. You don't need me to tell you that. I mean, that's the obvious thing that every organization does.
No, I think it's very interesting, and all the more so that we've been invited by Frieze Masters in London to create Spotlight this year. And we got a lot of interest in international press, including the FT and New York Times. And the people we met who were the most interested by what we're doing were actually an Indian gallery who immediately invited us to create a show of Indian women artists who seems to be pretty well endowed, and it's a mix of gallery, institution, and in India it's all mixed up. And we also got a lot of interest from Frieze Art Fair, which just opened in Seoul.
See, I think that you're exactly right. I think that's probably, I think it would be a very interesting way to approach it. I mean, I was just giving a talk recently for a group of Iranian, the Iranian arts community. It's a very important and well-to-do one, for example, in the United States. And I think that, if you could find kind of a key leader or two in multiple countries like this, you could create a very powerful international group in India, in Seoul, it would probably be the Iranians in exile, but I think a kind of feminist, a pan cultural support group would be much more interesting and eventually and possibly much more beneficial.
Okay, I love the idea. Thanks.
I think it's a good idea.
Again, I think you'll have to figure out the tax situation and where you base it and all of that, but I'm sure, and you would know this probably much better than I would, Camille. There are, for example, in the United States, there's a business committee for women in the arts in the United States. I think there's more than one, and I'm sure they exist in other places. And it might be a way also to connect to business leaders, and one of the things in the United States that is constantly being talked about, which I know is true internationally, but it's really present in the United States, is the idea of that the only way to really represent diversity in cultural institutions and in art history broadly, which is what you're involved with, is the idea of those communities seeing themselves in the history as exhibited on the walls or within the books and the texts that are written and in the lectures that are being given. And what has motivated you is women have been excluded over and over and over again. And I think that even business people, women who are in business, who not necessarily culturally oriented per se, could get very excited about this, because it's really about increasing the presence and the power of women generally across the board.
No, I relate to that. And recently we had, I'm more and more invited to give talks on Zoom for international corporate whatever, and more and more lawyers, like big lawyers company, want me to talk about what I'm doing. And I did that for a few years, and the last one I did was super successful in the sense that they told me, okay, you have to talk for an hour and we'll pay you 2,000 euros, which seemed a lot for me. And after the talk, which lasted maybe 30 minutes, they decided to give me 10 times the money because they loved what I've said.
That's where I'm going with this, Camille. Exactly. I think, and I think that angle is what is going to benefit, because you're already tapping into something very deep, rather than just kind of a kind of symbolic place in the United States to be one of many institutions. I think this is much more interesting, and also for your model is not a typical model in a way. You've been very adventurous and courageous to go independent. So you should come up with a new way of funding that matches that, and not just following in the same way.
Yeah. Well, my narrative is very personal now. I explain my story.
Exactly. It is very personal. And I think that that's what's going to convince people to give, and particularly women leaders who have felt like they want to make their mark, but it's not just simply in business, but through culture.
Have you been doing that in France? Have you been talking to the women entrepreneurs?
A little bit, yes. I do that when I'm invited. I'm not like, I don't have a time devoted to finding these people.
The problem is the time and the
because
structure.
it's just a question of time.
No, you
also.
can't.
No, I can't.
You can't do everything.
No, we can't.
You can't.
But
Do you have a development director?
What?
Do you have a
fundraising person on your staff?
We're 4 people, Adam. We're so small. It's intimate.
And as you know, the fundraising often.
I'm the one, who's raising money.
Trust me, I've been small too, Camille.
Yes.
I understand.
So it's my time. So I do it when I feel like it, and voila.
I know.
I think it's a great idea. A great idea, Adam. I think that, however, if you're looking at global philanthropy, one would anticipate that the most success will occur in terms of actual potential fundraising from the United States. And as an example, like the Friends of Israeli Museum, they began in the United States and then they set up organizations elsewhere in the world. So I think that probably, and given the relationships, particularly in the arts, that most of the world has probably with the United States, that the beginning structure is probably the United States. But I do think in everything that I set up in nonprofit, you always have to find a strategy which is unique. And I think your idea makes a lot of sense to me, and it goes perfectly with what Camille is doing.
I mean, I think, again, what I would look at, Camille, and this is where I think that, and what you said, it's very personal. And that to me is a key word in this. This is personal to you, but it's personal also because you're a woman and you've experienced this and the lack of support and direction in your own life. And that story is a very powerful one. And what I would suggest, again, I would find a leader or two in places where you have worked before, in London, in Seoul. And I think, and again, I understand you're a very small organization. As I said, I've worked in small organizations as well in my life. So I totally understand. I'm not, you don't have, but I actually think this is why your personal connection and your personal story, if you could find, one people in 8, 9 countries, for example, where you've worked, where you already have connections, and you could do that in 4 or 5 cities in the United States, rather than trying to just, because Scott, I understand what you're saying, but I do think, I think what I would try to do is I would try to target maybe, a leader in one in LA, one in Chicago, one in Houston, one in New York, one in Boston, but like 4 or 5 instead of just trying some all-out fundraising effort. Because I think what's going to happen is you've just pointed out, Camille, the problem. The problem is you're one person. So to set up a major fundraising that's broad based in the United States, the ones that have been successful, which you talk about, the Israel Museum. First of all, the Israel Museum has an office in New York. It has a very active fundraising arm. I know James very well. We talk all the time. It also depends on a very personal Jewish community and the stories of personal. And actually, it's the stories of personal that make people give money, whether it's being from a particular group or not. So I think what I would do, Camille, is I would try to find somebody in New York, and I'd be happy to, maybe make some suggestions one-on-one at some point. But maybe find somebody in New York, or 1 or 2 in New York, find somebody in Chicago, find somebody in Boston, but then simultaneously find someone in London, find someone in Seoul, because then it will encourage those individuals to want to be part of a group instead of just one of 100 people in the United States. Which I can tell you, most of the people who are on my board are on 3 other boards already, at least. And you need to have something that really distinguishes yourself. And I'm not trying to push you away from the United States, but I think you need to think of, even if the US is prime, it has to be prime among others in order to really make an individual case. That's my take. And that's, I've done a lot of fundraising here, and I'm been involved with a lot of international organizations. I'm on the board of the American Academy in Rome, which is where I am now, and I'm involved with their fundraising. As you know, I worked with the American Center in Paris, and work with the Terra Fund. I've done a lot with international fundraising, and what I'm advising you is to be really surgical, and you need to be surgical anyway because you're only one person.
Exactly. I have very little time, so I love this idea of just finding one person per city, or even one person per country.
You could work with your key contacts in these different countries, where they would actually maybe help you to find somebody in each country. Just trying to find my notes here. I made some notes. By the way, the presentation you sent me was very good. It's very thorough overview, which was great.
Adam, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
I hope to see you soon. It's been very helpful.